Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and hopefully you're still awake as we're trying to get a lot of information in a short space of time to you. I think we're going to sort of affirm a lot of what's already been said, but also give you a kind of different slants on things as we go, as to how we manage it in our setting. So next slide, please. So we're talking about logic modeling, if you like, as an activity, as a process. It's a verb. It's as even though it might actually be producing a diagram, but it's actually, I think, as everybody's already indicated, a very active process. Just a little bit about Wessex AHSN. A lot of what we focus on is innovations, and you're working with innovators. So you're often working with people who are in industry and they've got their thing, they've got their magic gadget, if you like, and they're kind of, assuming it works and it's the best thing. So a lot of what we do is really, and often we work with commissioners in the NHS to actually deliver these innovations into the NHS. So they're obviously got a lot of hopes about what this innovation might do, what the fix is going to be. Next slide, please. And what at Wessex AHSN, not all the AHSNs have dedicated evaluation teams, but we're very lucky at Wessex that we've actually got quite a large team for an AHSN that conduct these evaluations, and we work with mixed method approaches, qualitative and quantitative methods, and we would basically work with a range of people in the NHS and the innovators as well. And I think that actually it makes life interesting. Next slide, please. So logic modelling and theory of change, we've had that sort of stall set out for you. But what we're really doing is trying to systematically make connections between these various different activities of what you need, what you're going to do, what you'll get out of it, and what's actually going to be the effects on those that you're trying to have some impact on. And there are sort of three, I think, core processes from that we're trying to get people to understand. So part of what we're doing when we're working with innovators and people in the NHS, but is to really understand what it is that we're going to evaluate. That's what they're coming to us for. So what is it we're going to evaluate? So we do need to understand the thing, what it is. What are the mechanisms of action? How are you assuming it's going to work? How is it going to work? And what is it, what are the problems it's going to solve? And then describe how you're going to implement it. And often there is a view that, that the innovation or what it is you want to, the change process, it's going to, it itself might be effective. You might have shown its effectiveness, but you might want to then go and put it somewhere else. So it's the implementation of that innovation is another key thing that is a separate process to understand. So understanding how something works is one thing, but how you then implement that into the setting or wherever it is you want to is another key thing. And there's a whole sort of, if people are familiar, field of implementation science, implementation tools, understanding and implementation strategies. And then obviously what we want to do is evaluate that. So we're looking at whether something worked as expected and whether it was implemented as planned. So that's how we, if you like, structure what we're doing. And just sort of an example is, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with these fingertip oximetry oximeters that measure oxygen in the blood that were rolled out in COVID, because obviously that was a key issue to understand people's oxygen levels if they had COVID. So they would be having these very common use devices at home. So these devices work, we know that they work. But obviously they were being rolled out into people's homes, so they were under the, they weren't being monitored by healthcare professionals. then it's come to light that actually the light source used to measure the oxygen level actually is impaired in some way due to darker skin. So it's not as accurate if and will give false readings with darker skins. There's not a terribly massive problem, and there are ways of people understanding how to measure baseline, etc. Do that, but it is understanding these pulse oximeters have been out there for a very long time, but it seems to have only come to light recently that there is a problem with them. So innovations are constantly needing to be evaluated, and that actually sometimes it's the circumstances in which they're implemented that we can actually see complexities arising with these innovations. Next slide, please. So I think logic modelling and theory of change is really all about storytelling and the narrative, and I think my colleagues on the call have already really set that out in terms of how complex it is, but really what we're trying to do is find the story that's going through that takes us from what we have, how we implement it, and then obviously how we're going to find out about whether it works or not. Next slide, please. So logic model sessions are really working with people to disentangle what the problem is, how they think it works. You're really testing, I think, as people have already said, underlying assumptions, and people do have underlying assumptions about how things are going to work, and you need to challenge that. But you also need to understand how you're going to enable it to work, how you're going to be able to get it in, there's an awful lot of work that innovators have to do in terms of meeting regulatory and compliance. They also then have to, negotiate various different delivery mechanisms into the NHS if it needs IT support or if it needs to operate with other IT systems. So with innovations, the innovation might be doing something, but it's got to work within a system, and it's understanding how you're going to get that into the system. And then obviously thinking about, how will you know that it has worked? Next slide, please. So really, I'm sure people are very familiar with this cartoon. A lot of us use it a lot of the time. But it is this idea of where the challenge is and understanding that process of how something works and, what is needed to enable it to work. Next slide, please. Over to my colleague, Emily.
Thanks, Jackie. So I'm going to describe a little bit about what one of these logic modelling sessions or processes would look like at Wessex AHSN. And first of all, with a bit of setting the scene. So as Jackie described, we work a lot to provide advice and guidance on evaluation to innovators, as well as system partners of the NHS. And for the innovators, I think it is fair to say that a number of them would have relatively limited experience of having to explain the hypothesis or the theory that underpins their intervention. So what the change is going to be and how they're going to get there in a systematic way. So what we do to support them to do this, we see it's such a valuable process to go through, is we use the theory of change as the first step in doing that. So understanding how they could approach evaluation. With system partners, for example, it could actually be the first step in co-designing an evaluation with them. So next slide, please. So a little bit about how we prep a virtual theory of change or logic modelling session. I'm specifically talking about virtual here because I joined Wessex AHSN in December of last year, and all my experience with Wessex in running theory of change and logic model sessions has been online. So prior to that, in the old world, as I call it, we'd be in a room together for a number of hours, half a day, multiple sessions, loads of post-it notes, etc. And we just don't have that luxury anymore. And so we've had to change it up a little bit. And so I'm going to describe specifically how to do this virtually, because we found it can work and it can work quite nicely. But so some key points. First of all, around how to prepare for a session. I'd say it's really important that all those who are participating know what's in store for them. So explaining that it's going to be a highly interactive session, that they'll be expected to participate in lots of discussion, share their views, become prepared to describe change, to describe what success might look like. For myself, in terms of kind of having some things prepped in my back pocket for if the conversation or discussion runs dry, then I would source info from project documents or emails or conversations that I've had in the run up to it. And that's really just to be kept there if I need it. The actual facilitation then of the session, I tend to schedule them for a maximum of 2 hours. And that's because, as we all know, virtual training, learning, participation it's tiring in a different way to being in a room with people. So 2 hours feels like the right amount of time. We use MS Whiteboard. It works for us. There are other tools out there, and perhaps as part of this session, we can hear about other really good online collaboration tools. And to kickstart the conversation, we start at the end. So the ultimate change that the intervention or the innovator would be expecting to see. And then we try to work backwards. So what would success look like and how would they get there? The facilitator, so me or another person from the AHSN, would be adding post-it notes to the board as we go along for every point that people make. And they might do that by putting their hand up, calling out, putting something in the chat box. So the point I'm getting at is that this is really about capturing everyone's views and everyone feeling like they've had a chance to contribute. So we do try to work backwards, but I would say it's not linear. And it can, as Genevieve said at the start of the session, it can end up looking like a little bit of a mess by the end of it. And that's absolutely fine. And I'll come on to how we can deal with that disentanglement after the initial session. And one of the things as facilitators that we aim to do, particularly with limited time, is to be constantly challenging statements that are coming across as perhaps high level or aspirational, that talking about intent. What we want to hear is that description of specific change. So what's change going to look like and how are we going to get there? And then lastly, but really importantly, is always schedule a break in your sessions. So next slide, please. I'm sorry that these are so blurry, but they are real life examples. So I needed to make sure you couldn't read what was on them. But this first set is what that kind of initial laydown of ideas might look like. So we've got post-its that are seemingly in no particular order, different colours popping up across them, and quite a lot of words on some of them. If we go to the next set, perhaps by the end of the 2-hour session, we might have something that's looking a little more ordered. Perhaps ideas and statements are being clustered, put into some sort of chronological order. Perhaps we even managed to lay down some arrows to start to disentangle relationships between steps in the change process. Next slide, please. So things that we found to work really well with a virtual session is that participation remains really, really good. If you set the session up to invite and encourage people who are able and ready to talk about change, then I've rarely, if ever, needed to use my prompts. And in fact, thank you, Kate. And in fact, it can be useful to have those prompts almost as a sense check towards the end of the session to make sure that everything has been captured. As I said, whiteboard does work well. And the last one is about taking it slowly. And I don't mean that kind of within the session, but you can just allow or enter the session understanding that within 2 hours, you won't have a complete theory of change, and that's absolutely fine. Things that we found difficult is energy levels, so always scheduling a break. And the last one I think is really important and something that we're grappling with, and I'll talk about how we're kind of addressing it a little bit, is getting beyond the change story. So this is what change will look like at the different kind of points, long-term, medium-term, etc., to describing and picking apart those mechanisms for change or the underlying assumptions between the steps in that change process. And that is the real strength of theory of change. So how do we get there? Is at Wessex is, Kate, if you just move on, I think this should be my last slide actually, is that we We allow all participants time to review. We ensure that afterwards they get the whiteboard, that they can play around with it themselves, add comments, feedback to us, that the participants really take ownership of that theory of change that they're describing, that this isn't ours as Wessex AHSN because we've facilitated it, it's theirs to grapple with further. And then we have a separate session, which does seem to work pretty well, to talk specifically about that implementation aspect, which is really where we drill into the mechanisms for change. Following all of that, we then feel that we're in a position to start sort of mapping those ideas from the theory of change session onto the logic model framework. And then the logic model becomes our tool for discussing the outcomes of interest, metrics, and so on and so forth. Just quickly pass back to Jackie.
So sorry, Jen's covered this already earlier, but just again to remind people that I think something that's we're aware of is a weakness sometimes, and something that you do need to ask people a lot is to think about what could go wrong, because it might be useful to think of mitigations earlier on. You know, this might happen, therefore should we be doing this? And what data you might need to be capturing in your evaluation to ensure that you have covered that. So I think, yeah, this whole concept of getting people to think about potential harms, adverse effects, unintended consequences, but actually thinking about anticipating that rather than waiting to see if it happens. So I think we'll just something we need to do better. So we'll end on that note.